Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to the launch of Listening as Shared and Social Practice, a new open educational resource edited by Lindsey French and Kate Joranson. Thank you for tuning in to our discussion on listening and other aspects of this new book today. We're so grateful that you took the time to come out or to come here. We're grateful to be hosting this book launch on Treaty 4 lands, the traditional lands of the Nayoak, Anishinaabeg, Nakota, Dakota, and Lakota First Nations, and homeland of the Métis-Michif Nation. I am Shuana Niessen, hosting this book launch today through the Open Education and Publishing Program. I manage that program. And before I allow the others to introduce themselves, I will answer a question that you might have when I said open educational resource. So what is that? The only difference between an educational resource and an open educational resource is how it's licensed. So everything that we create is copyright, but authors and creators who choose to publish an open educational resource have chosen a license that an open license that gives perpetual permissions for others to reuse, remix, adapt in any way, revise, translate, redistribute the resource, and often that's for free. And the authors and creators of this book chose a Creative Commons BY-SA license, which means that they would like to be, if others choose to use and redistribute or remix their material, they want to be attributed as the creators of those and as the source of that information, and also that you'd have to share the resource you create with a similar and compatible open license. So that explains that. I'm going to hand the microphone over to you, Lindsey, for introduction.
Thanks so much for putting this together, Shuana, and for everybody for joining us today. I'm joining you today from the University of Maine, which is located on Marsh Island, and that's located in the homeland of the Penobscot Nation, where issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing. Penobscot homeland is connected to the other Wabanaki tribal nations, which include the Passamaquoddy, the Maliseet, and the Mi'kmaq through kinship and alliances and diplomacy. And much of the work on this book was done while I was in Treaty 4 territory with a lot of collaboration. And I'd like to thank a number of people and organizations who supported or collaborated on this project before we jump in. So the publication grew out of a conference in 2022, which was organized with Jake Moore at the University of Saskatchewan as a co-PI on the conference and partner in the conference vision, as well as Jeremy Morris and Jennifer Smart of the Great Lakes Association for Sound Studies, or GLASS, with support from the University of Regina, the Humanities Research Institute, the University of Saskatchewan Art Galleries and Collections, and largely through a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council Connections grant, which included Sarah Abbott and Sharon Holmes as collaborators. And the publication that we're going to talk about today was supported by so many people, which included Shuana very largely at so many stages of the project. So thank you, Shuana. And it was created with funding from the government of Saskatchewan through the University of Regina's Open Education Publishing Program, which turned us on to this idea in the first place. And that's supported by Dr. David Gregory, Dr. Nilgun Under, and Shuana. Other support for the publication came from Isaac Mulalani, who was previously part of the U of R program, Christina Winter in the library, who guided us through a lot of complex copyright issues, Sabina Vaught and the editors of Knowledge Justice, who Kate is going to talk about a little more later, Josephine Forrest, who at the University of Regina, who discussed Indigenous pedagogy and listening with myself and Kate midway through the project. And also all of the contributors to the program, to the publication, which includes Eleni Ira Penurgia, Lisa Sanlos, Rennie Tang, Fereshteh Toosi, who's here today, Josh Rios, Jamie Reimer, Lorelei DeAndriel, and Kyle Lockett, Magda Sinova, Nikki Lint, Sean Steele, and Steve selling. So sharing gratitude is also a way of describing the relationships that formed some of the project, which I'll follow as a framework to introduce myself briefly and my contribution. So I'm newly based at the University of Maine in the Department of Art, and I was previously for 3 years an assistant professor at the University of Regina in the Faculty of Media, Art, and Performance. And it was there that I met Shuana and many other collaborators on this list. Before that, I'd been living, working, and teaching in Pittsburgh at the University of Pittsburgh in the Department of Studio Art, where I first met Kate and where we collaborated together on a coding event early on in my time there. And Fereshteh is also a friend and collaborator from my time in Chicago, where I was previously based. So in this book, I had the role of co-editor with Kate, who I'll turn it over to now after this really lengthy introduction.
No, that was great. Thank you so much, Lindsey. My name is Kate Joranson, and I'm zooming in here from the occupied ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee, Lenape, Osage, and Shawnee peoples, and as well as the Seneca, who have stewarded the land for generations, maintaining and building connections with the land and water. I'm an artist and educator, former librarian at the University of Pittsburgh, which is how I know Lindsey, where we first started collaborating. And my role in this project has been as her co-editor, and I was also a presenter at the conference that the book grew out of, and so I sort of came in to the project in that way. And I will turn it to Fereshteh to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for organizing this, and thank you for everyone who showed up to the Zoom. My name is Fereshteh Toosi. I use they, them pronouns. I live in Miami, Florida, in the United States. This is the land of the Tequesta, Miccosukee, and Seminole people. The Miccosukee people still steward this land, and I've lived here for about 7 years, and I've learned a lot from my friends and the leaders, and I'm really very grateful to them for sharing their wisdom with me as I became acquainted with this bioregion. The project that I shared in the book that we're going to talk about today, it was something that has a seed in Lawrence, Kansas. So I do want to mention that place, even though I don't talk about that place very specifically in my contribution. It was very formative in creating the resource I shared. Lawrence, Kansas is on the ancestral homelands of several tribal nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Shawnee. And there are 4 federally recognized tribal nations in Kansas: the Prairie Band, Potawatomi, Kickapoo, Sac, Fox, and Iowa. So I just wanted to mention them as well. I forgot to mention that I am an artist and an educator. I teach in the Art and Art History department at FIU, which is Florida International University, here in Miami. I'm also a social work student. So I think that's all I needed to share. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kate, Lindsey, and Fereshteh, for your introductions and also for inviting me into this conversation today. You're all very interesting people with interesting interests, and this book is a result of that. And it's quite a unique book. It's not your typical conference proceedings for sure. And so but before I ask my first question, I'm going to say, if you, the audience, have a question, please put it in the Q&A, and we will take some time at the end to have the editors and contributors answer. But my first question is, please tell us the story about how this book came to be.
Thanks, Shuana. And I'll start with this and then pass it off to Kate and Fereshteh. But yeah, I mentioned this. I mentioned this a little bit in that the publication came from the conference. But one of the goals of putting together the conference was to create a sort of blend of academic and practice-based people coming together around the topic of listening. We didn't want to focus on sound. We worked with GLASS, the Great Lakes Association for Sound Studies, and there was, an initial hope to work with practices of listening rather than sound, sort of following this turn in sound studies to think about the position of the listener as like really situated and active. And so that sort of formed the theme. And then as we were, putting the call together, we wanted people who were like also doing the work of that, as well as people who were doing the thinking around that. So the conference itself was this blend of, there were some traditional panels with people reading papers. We also watched and listened to films. There were a number of workshops and sound walks. And we did have like online tracks and in-person tracks, but we really tried to provide a range of experiences to go through during the conference. And so that informed how we were approaching the book as well. We thought at first about just sort of including or inviting, everybody to include what they had presented in the conference, but instead we wanted it to be a sort of like living document and grow from maybe what we had learned or gone through during the conference experience. So it includes things like lesson plans, traditional essays, video works, reflections. And so, it sort of grew from that disciplinary approach and coming both from academia and from a practitioner standpoint.
And I'll add that one of the approaches that Lindsey and I really wanted to take when making that transition from the conference to the book, the open textbook, is that we wanted to preserve as much of the spirit of the conference as possible and the values of the conference. And so part of that was to continue to learn from all the folks that inspire us. And one of that is the editors of a book called Knowledge Justice, Sophia Leung and Jorge Lopez McKnight. When they made that book, they crafted this really beautiful collaborative peer review process for the editor, for the chapter authors. And I learned about it through, a book talk that they gave when they first published that book. And so when I was sharing with Lindsey that, hey, I think this is pretty exciting, it became part of our dialogue and how we started to shape. Thanks for dropping the link to that, Lindsey. And it started to shape the process we wanted to set up and invite people into. And so what we ended up settling on is we broke the chapter authors into sort of two groups and invited them to consider not necessarily collaborating on their writing per se, but really, giving quality feedback to each other, listening deeply to each other, and just sort of having as much dialogue as they wanted to bring into their own editing process. So, we tried not to force anything, but just to sort of cultivate a space where that dialogue could grow if they wanted to do that. And as a result, one of the things that was so inspiring about Knowledge Justice is that you could really see in that book that the threads that ran through the chapters and the questions that the authors were grappling with were really connected. And so we're hoping that some of that comes through in this book as well. Fereshteh, do you want to share more about what it was like to be a contributor?
Sure. You know, this process for me, I did attend the conference in person, and I really enjoyed guiding a morning listening walk for the participants during that time. And actually, I think on the cover, you can see an image of that gathering we had that I facilitated. And the process of, I think the formal invitation of contributing to the open educational resource came in May of 2023. And then much of June was spent in discussion with the other contributors who were in my small group. And I really appreciated the care that Lindsey and Kate had put into kind of proposing a format for those meetings, while also allowing the group to have some agency in how they decided to collaborate, but that there was a clear purpose for this idea of the feedback and how to share that. And so over the course of several weeks, I was discussing with the other participants, most of whom I had never met before. And so it was really great to be able to connect with the other contributors. I think a lot of times in academia and publishing, we might be a part of a community of scholars, but then, and even contributing to a text or a collective volume, and never really get to connect with those people unless we see them at a conference. So I love this. I love that opportunity to have that exchange with everybody, to receive line edits from people with really different viewpoints and like perspectives and backgrounds. And also, I really appreciated when Kate and Lindsey were putting this together, that there was an openness to contributing contributions that weren't necessarily precisely coming out of the conference. So I could have written a paper about the listening session, or I could have even presented something very specifically about that. But for me, that in-person experience at the conference was its own very much a in real-time event that I didn't feel that excited about replicating and writing, but I did think that I could offer something to my community, to others who are interested in this topic, that would be very pragmatic. So that was the approach I took, and I really was glad to have the option to do that. Sometimes you don't get that choice. And yeah, I think so that's how we find ourselves here today. It's a long process, but I felt like it was really stewarded with care.
Thank you, Fereshteh. Just as you were speaking, I realized that the way that Kate and Lindsey were framing their role as editors, co-editors, must have changed, or it must have been impacted by this concept of listening. I'm just wondering if you could speak to that, how you viewed yourselves as editors in light of this topic?
I can jump in there. I think a lot about the role of a midwife, um, or another sort of. There are other professions and traditions where people are there to sort of bring forward someone else's wisdom and be in dialogue and collaboration, and have a mutual process where we're all um, learning from each other, but someone else's vision is the clear um, front. And I think I had always had this sort of these values and desire to work in this way, and then um, when I saw the conference call for proposals and saw this focus on listening, it just kind of gelled for me, like, oh, I think I need to I need to meet these people. And I knew Lindsey already, but I was like, wow, this is a community I hadn't really thought that I might have a relationship with. So for me, like, my entrance into even thinking about presenting at the conference, let alone working with Lindsey to edit something, just kind of all came together in why I would even want to work with Lindsey, and because of their vision and values to center listening and put forward other people's vision and wisdom. I don't know if it's a little bit of a rambling answer, but it's there's a narrative there hopefully for you. Do you want to add anything, Lindsey? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think the only other thing I'll add in terms of like, yeah, the role that listening played in the process. I mean, I think there are sort of like two thoughts here. One is that for both the conference and the publication, I had like absolutely no desire to like make a chapter or a presentation because like it's just like it's a different mode. And it was enough for me to be like trying to think of like who all is at the table. It's like maybe like when you're hosting or something. It's like that's maybe other people feel more comfortable hosting, but it's like that sort of like it's just attention on everybody. Um, and a lot of that attention is asking questions and then listening to the answers. And I think we also had a few points in our process where we were trying to organize things and or like, yeah, meet deadlines, or can we push a deadline to include somebody or not? And so some of that too is like trying to get a sense of like the will of the group. And so there was a little, yeah, there was some listening there. We also like explicitly sought feedback. Like you and I sought feedback as we were working on the introduction or layout or organization. Some of that was like more formal and some of it was less formal. But like, yeah, speaking with Josephine, speaking with Sabina, like, yeah, there were these points in our process where like, we really, yeah, we're needed to ask some questions and get some feedback as well. So, yeah, it came in, I think, to our role as editors that way.
Yeah, I would just what you said about our meetings with Josephine and Sabina, they both really helped us work through some of what we were learning by being editors. I feel like we were really trying to explore what does it mean to be white settlers working in this field and with these materials and with this knowledge. And so they both really helped us think through and sort of deepen our awareness, and challenge us about that role and and to really think about what is our relationship to indigeneity throughout this process.
I think that connects us to the next question about why this book. Why is it an important book? I think your reply, Kate, was moving us in that direction of knowledge justice.
Yeah, I think we had agreed ahead of time that I would start this question, although I think Kate might flow more easily here, but I think, yeah, a big part of it was like, yeah, like I often will teach classes that are sort of in the realm of sound, um, working with students who are pursuing sound art or incorporating sound into yeah, artistic or other creative practices. And there is a lot in the field of sound art or sound studies that address listening, but it's like really easy for it to come back down to the bottom. I'm taking a course right now, like as a student with the Canadian composer Barry Truax, and he's going through the history of acoustic ecology, and like right there, there's like this attention on listening in the very beginning, but it sort of falls down. And so part of the purpose or hope for using this book is to like to think in a contemporary way about, yeah, how we can center listening and what the role is. And I'll also mention, like I worked with this book in a grad class I'm teaching this semester, focus on listening, and like the class name was expanded practices of listening. And halfway through the semester, like I had to keep reminding students, like, no, this is a listening class. They kept calling it a sound art class, and I was like, it's not a sound class, it's a class about listening. So even when it's right there in the title, I think there's like a yeah, we don't know how to sort of center it. And so, yeah, part of the purpose of the book was to try to shift that or insist on it.
Yeah, I love that story about the students sort of making that shift in their awareness. And I feel like I love that that is a part of the story of the book. Um, the intro that Lindsey and I wrote is primarily like a pedagogical introduction. So it's focused on what does it mean to teach with these materials and learn from these materials. And so one of the lenses that we wanted to bring to that is um, thinking about experiential learning and thinking about refusing binaries. Because so often in Eurocentric academia and just sort of cultural more broadly, there are these perceived binaries between teacher and learner, or human and non-human, or um, all these different expert, non-expert, male, female, music and noise, like all these things that just seem sort of so obvious that they're taken for granted, and in a lot of spaces. And this was a space where that wasn't taken for granted, and that made it exciting, I think. And so when we're working with students and trying to help them sort of explore what does it mean to refuse a binary, um, experiential learning is I think almost always part of that strategy. And so a lot of these chapters really help, Fereshteh's in particular really offer clear steps, like, and a lesson plan for how to explore this, how to explore um, listening and speaking and experiencing land and experiencing different kinds of sound. So it becomes this full-bodied sensory experience um, that ends up sort of communicating that plurality is what we value, plurality of sounds and ideas and perspectives, um, and that in that sort of plurality, I think it's easier to sort of grapple with all of the interdisciplinary stuff that comes up when you're working with sound and listening, um, because it doesn't there's lots of ways in. There's acoustic ecology, there's we have biologists, contributors, we have all these different ways in, and yet it's a lot to hold at the same time when there are all these beautiful pathways into the subjects. And one of the chapter authors has this wonderful paragraph that I feel like really embodies this, like the experiential learning and working across disciplines. And so I'd like to read that to you. It's by Lorelei D'Androli. She says, "My work now is largely across the fields of both sound and transgender studies. I get up in front of rooms full of mostly cis people and explain my trans experience. The celestial music of my trans joy is usually missed. Like a recording of my own voice, the audience misses the additional layers of resonance I hear as the vibrations move through my own blood and bone toward my inner ear. Presenting my work on sound to sound people and presenting my work on trans art to trans people yields different outcomes than when presenting sound to painters and transness to the bigender society at large." And so I just wanted us to sit with that and hear Lorelei's description of what it's like to be operating in multiple categories and also refusing the categories while doing that. Um, and I think Fereshteh is going to share a little bit, or no, I can't remember. I'm sorry.
That's
Did
okay.
you want to say
Yeah.
anything about your lesson plan, or maybe, oh, Shuana, sorry,
Yeah,
Shuana.
that's okay. Well, that's okay. Just go ahead, Fereshteh, and speak to any interdisciplinary connections that emerged through the contributors' work that you may not have initially anticipated, especially given your small group work.
Yes. Just reflecting on what Kate shared from Lorelei. I do feel like the activity that I've shared, it is something that came out of a collaboration, or I guess I should say, I first conducted the activity myself at the University of Kansas at an invitation from Emily Ryan, who works for an interdisciplinary humanities center there called the Commons, and in connection with poet Megan Kaminsky. So I really wanted to give them a shout out for initiating this activity. So it was really very much an activity that was designed for poetry students. And I'm not teaching in a poetry program. So that was really interesting to bring the awareness of listening and voice to a group of students who are mostly really had been focused on reading alphabetic text from a page. Of course, recitation is very much part of being a poet, but I really also wanted them to connect their writing to the place of the places that they're in. So that was really interdisciplinary connection for me. I'm also reflecting on how the way that my contribution did turn out is quite, in a way, it still has this kind of feeling of a traditional lesson plan, which refers to students and educators. So in some respects, I feel that this really is the only or best place for this document to live, because it's within the container of listening as a shared and social practice. Outside and within that container, the focus on listening can be enhanced and kind of is the context I'm presenting this in. If it was out of that context, I feel that there would be a lot missing, that I would need to add more to kind of bring some a deeper conceptual awareness for whoever's reading the document. So I'm sort of reflecting on some of the ways I would have to change this if it wasn't part of this collected volume in order to really bring the listening to the forefront. But because it was in a collection where there are other texts and writings that can put the reader and the I guess you could say the user of this lesson plan in an appropriate mindset, then I felt that trust of, okay, I can just present the lesson plan as it is without having to do that, because there's so many others who are speaking to that. All that is to say is my contribution, you know, I look back and I think, oh, well, I'm taking listening for granted in a way, but it's because I feel like I'm in a company of works that are allowing this to create something. It's an actual hands-on exercise that can be within that context. So I'm really glad for that, that's how it works within that context. And of course, the other contributors who I spoke with were also bringing in lots of different texts and suggestions that I didn't know about. And so that really enhanced what could be possible.
Thank you, Fereshteh. So this is a question to the editors. What surprised you about this process? What kept you up at night? What challenged or troubled you? Were there any essays or contributions in the book that surprised you in terms of their approach to sound or methodologies used? I'll hand it over to you, Kate.
Yeah, thanks, Shuana. So many things kept us up at night and were challenging. One of the most practical things that was really challenging, that I think, in academic spaces anyway, we take for granted, because you're just supposed to forge ahead, is just how much time it took to do this and to try to do it with care, while I, at the time, was managing a small departmental academic library within a large university, and that where there were expectations to work in this way and publish, and just how challenging it is to try to carve out space, just very literally space and time, but to carve out the kind of space that we wanted to make this. That is, it can feel like an extra layer of work, but it's also a survival technique, I think, and a survival strategy for making as many spaces as possible to be ones where humans matter and relationships matter. And so that was a huge challenge, worth it, but hard. And I think another thing I'll just say is just how humbling it is to work across so many different disciplines coming together into this community of people who care about sound and listening. And there's just, I got to learn so much, and it was interesting to really try to pull threads together into the introduction to find ways of using language that honored the way each of the chapter authors were using language, because that can get so niche in different areas. And And so that was pretty exciting too.
Yeah, to add on to some of these things that Kate brought up, like I definitely underestimated the scope in some ways. Like I think setting out, and this is just like my own, uh, yeah, like unfamiliarity with working at the scale. I was like, oh yeah, this will be a couple of months. Like we will get together and talk, and then we'll, put this into this format. I forgot to say at the very beginning that like a huge thanks goes out to Amin Malakutika too, who was a graduate research assistant who helped who like did a lot of the work putting the contributions into the Pressbooks format, which is the format we use. So it's a bit of underestimating the scope. And also, yeah, some of the challenges of working within an open educational resource. We sort of touched on this at the beginning, but like it's this mode of working that's meant to be shared and meant to be open. And there are like considerations coming like with some of the funding of putting the project together that it has to be open and shared. And we're working with artists who have made a lot of these original materials. And so a lot of the conversations around like international copyright was like that was like actually a huge learning experience and challenge and surprise. So it seems like very boring, but it ended up getting us into these conversations about like what did people feel comfortable sharing and why and how. And since it was based in Canada, we followed Canadian copyright laws, which are different than the United States. And yeah, we had contributors also in Prague. So there were just like these different, yeah, sort of like surprising challenges there around like how do we share the work? Yeah, like learning about some of the structures for that. There was, yeah, there was in your question, Shauna, also like, were there any essays or contributions that surprised you? There was a lot, like, because so many of them strayed from the original presentation at the conference and like grew into their own things. There were some really interesting moves that were made. And I'll mention like Magda Stanova's piece. I forget the title, but it's about like not paying attention. And she originally presented it as the last presentation on a conference panel, and it was a sort of meta conference presentation about losing your attention while you're listening to somebody give a conference presentation. And it was so perfect in the moment when she delivered it, and I was like, oh, thanks, Kate. Yeah, mind wandering during lectures. And I was like, how is this going to fit into this resource, this open educational resource? And so she had to re-record it in these different ways. And that became also part of like the new form that she was making. So it became almost like this video art piece in some ways. So that was really exciting. There's a lot of different directions that these things took. I guess the other thing I'll mention also is like having taught with the book this semester, and like teaching a class about expanded listening practices. There was a lot I had to pull in that wasn't included in the book. And Kate and I talked about this, like it's not an all-in, it's not trying to cover the whole area, partly because we were working with people who are at the conference who were also interested in working on this. So it sort of, yeah, it narrowed some of what was included. And so there were like actually quite a number of areas where I drew from other material. A lot of that is in various bibliographies throughout the book, but yeah, there were some gaps. Yeah, like about accessibility, which was also sort of something learned preparing this book accessibly, what that entails, and focusing on listening in multisensory ways. So yeah, there were just some areas that are not covered by this book. That I think one of the strengths of having an OER is that it can be sort of adapted on and modified and remixed. Yeah.
Did you have anything you want to add to that, Fereshteh?
Well, I was just thinking about something that came up with a friend who is not an academic, and but they do care about, experimental music, and they were doing research on this, and they were just finding that like it was impossible to access certain types of articles and scholarship on this music that they cared about as a quote unquote layperson, and we're very puzzled about the um, industry and economy around academic publishing. And so I feel like for me, there's so many people who can acknowledge that the 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 way that academic publishing is behind paywalls is so broken. I think many of us already can acknowledge that, but fewer people are participating in the solution, which is what we have here. We have a volume that can be shared. So if I author something, it is not just to to be a part of a publish or perish paradigm of higher education, but that I actually do want to share my work with others. And so I guess in terms of this idea of the lessons learned or surprises, like I think I already had these convictions or values, and I realized like, oh, I can make, it is not always presented as an option, but I can prioritize that. And that is what this process reminded me of, is to really celebrate that and to bring that to others, so that the culture shifts, the culture around the way knowledge circulates shifts. So not necessarily surprising, but just a really great kind of outcome of an encouragement or nudge for me to do this more often and to bring it to others.
I mentioned at the beginning that your book is BYSA, so attribution and share alike, but I didn't mention that artworks inside have exceptions. So to honor, to honor justice and knowledge justice and the, artwork, sometimes we don't want people adapting. So there is that flexibility as well. So that I know that's one of the lessons we learned along the way as helping you through the publishing process. But were there any other lessons? I know you did face a number of challenges, but any other lessons that you want to mention about editing or writing the book?
I think that covers it for me. Do you want to add anything, either of you?
Maybe just following this thread of the open access publishing that Fereshteh brought up. I think like one thing I don't think I would have known about this in quite such a direct way if I hadn't seen the call for some support from the school. And so like the call for support and then like the following up on the support really like opened me personally up to what's possible here. And then there was a little bit of a learning curve, but also a lot of support along the way. And so I think like it also made me like starting at a new institution, like seek out what kind of support there is for this type of publishing. And also like look at what kind of open educational resources are possible for the other classes I might be teaching. So I just maybe want to mention that, that part of that, the gratitude of like that support that came from the school, and the fact that it might be out there in some form in some other places.
So what do you hope readers will take away from the book, or how do you hope it will be taken up?
That's such a great question. So I think I want to tie this into a few other things that we've been talking about today, because I think part of what we want people to take away is that there are lots of ways into sound studies. That's one of the things that I found most meaningful personally. And I think, thinking about sound studies, thinking about listening as a practice is something that there are a lot of really natural connections to in other fields and other just ways of being in the world outside of academia. And so I think we're hoping that with the huge variety of chapters and authors and topics and stories and methods, that there will be something that you can connect with meaningfully, authentically, we hope. Yeah, Lindsey, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've sort of been slowly addressing this question throughout the morning. But yeah, I mean, I think one thing as well, in addition to like these multiple pathways in, is that we're hoping, I think that this book, this online publication can be used by a lot of different people too, in a lot of different settings. And that, one of the hopes of publishing it openly is that it will also be modified, adapted, added to certain parts, not used, like just sort of, used or engaged with as is appropriate to the context. And yeah, I think a lot of the contributors also included a lot of the scholars and practitioners that inspired them. So of course, any kind of book is going to lead you on these other like forking paths, but yeah, there's so many people who are working around this topic in interesting ways. So we're hopeful that this can lead people towards some of those things as well. And, and also just like, momentarily center listening. And the challenges of that. I mean, I think like, yeah, we haven't talked about any of the like specific people in this book, but so much of my thinking around this and some of Kate and I's discussions are about like this idea of the guest listener that Dylan Robinson brings up in ways where like listening doesn't mean you like own something or need to categorize it or even understand it. Sometimes listening is noticing that you don't need to do these things and that that's okay. So I don't know, that's maybe just like a sort of personal lesson that I've learned beyond, what we hope people to take away.
Okay, so we do have, I've allowed our audience to unmute if they would like to ask questions. We have about 5 minutes left. If you have a question.
Or if you're more comfortable, you could put your question in the chat as well.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm really excited about your book. I'm curious if any of the contributions address deaf or hard of hearing audiences in relationship to listening.
Short
Thanks.
answer is no, but longer answer, there are contributions that address multisensory listening and really conceptualize listening as something you do through vibration and other senses. You were going to say something though, Lindsey, too. Do you want to add to that?
Oh, the only thing I would add to that, Ginger, it's a really good question. And we did have some conference participants who were working, with deaf listeners. But when I, worked with this book in the class, we looked a lot and read some works by Joseph Grigley and Christine Sun Kim, who, brought some of that perspective. And Joseph Grigley's work, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he does a lot of like ways of thinking about listening with writing and has this whole practice of like passing notes back and forth. And I think he recently had a big show up at Mass MoCA where he like brought out a lot of these handwritten notes from his practice. So that's one of the big areas in the book that's not addressed, but yeah, was addressed when it was sort of like worked with in a class. But it's a great question. And I can drop, yeah, Joseph's work in the chat as well.
Well, if there are no other questions, thank you so much, editors and all contributors, for this work that you've worked so hard to produce and for presenting today on it. And I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And thank you to the audience for coming.
Thank you, Shuana, for hosting.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.